Hi, can everybody hear me? Yeah, that sounds good. Gucci. All right, so I figure we get started. So my talk about Satisfactory, basically, is mostly about world building. So building an industrial playground, as in we are a factory game, a world without people. We faced a lot of challenges with this, but the first thing I should probably talk about is me. So I joined the company in 2017. I joined as a level design intern and also became accidentally the writer and narrative designer. This is completely irrelevant. I just want to advise you against doing this ever. Then in 2019, Satisfactory goes early access. And this is a very significant milestone for us, of course, because it worked crazy. In the same year, I also became responsible for the world of Satisfactory. Like the previous owner basically left the company, and I inherited this feature entirely. And then in 2019, I also had a burnout, very unrelated, completely related. And then also, there's a bunch of stuff that happened in this time. I don't know, we're not going to talk about it. And then in 2024, we finally released Satisfactory to 1.0. And this is, 8 years later, most of the team has aged double this at this point. But it was a journey, and we learned a lot, and that's what I'm talking about today. So is there anyone here that does not know what Satisfactory is? You don't know what Satisfactory is? There's a little bit of a trailer that goes into what this game is and kind of what you do in it. You don't really need to hear. But the environments that you see in the background, like that's the stuff that we're kind of talking about today, like making this. Because obviously, the interesting thing is, this is a game that you arrive as a player, you're the only person there. There's no one else there. So how do you build a world that's interesting and also hopefully pretty when you do this? So yeah, you build factories in it. That's pretty much the gist. So Satisfactory is a first-person open-world factory building game with a dash of exploration and combat, and that exploration part is where we're focusing on. And I want to kind of make sure that when you look at the stuff I've done and the advice that I'm giving, it is all kind of given through these lenses. Because this is a very particular type of game. So not all of the advice that I'm going to give you might fit your game or will have to be sort of converted into something that is more useful. So basically, one of the main things that we had is this is an open world game, so there's no loading screens ever. Everything is accessible at any point in time. It is also a sandbox game, meaning we're not doing anything like level gating. The world can be accessed at any point at any time. The player ownership was a big one. This is a game where we're handing the players a bunch of tools, and they can do whatever they want with this. We are not going to tell them they're doing anything wrong. So the world was never going to impose anything on them specifically either. And the whole map was going to be handcrafted. This was a decision that was made at the time for a team of like 14 people. We didn't have the tech know-how to do procedural stuff, and we figured like, oh, it can't hurt to do all this by hand. It did. And yeah, like exploration was something that we, of course, had as a vital part of our games. Like you find new resources in the map, but it wasn't a focus, and that is also very important here, of course. So yeah, so how do you get from this thing that I saw when I joined Coffee Stain to the other thing as it looks now? And the big part there is like, yeah, how do you make a world that doesn't have any people in it? The first question you then have to kind of ask yourself is, who builds the world, right? Like, who are the people that do this? Well, I kind of identified three things that shape what a world looks like. You've got designers, creators, and natural forces. Now, designers, that's us, right? That's real people that have an engine, tools, whatever you're going on. Like maybe some procedural generation, it's your knowledge yourself. So maybe it's the generative AI that's being trained to replace us. I don't know. But it is a force that like has a meta perspective. So everything that's designed is made by a designer or a person in the real world that has both an in-universe purpose, so whatever the game wants the player to do, and a meta purpose, whatever the designer wants the player to do. Then you have creators, and creators are big words, diegetic sapiens, responsible for in-universe architecture, technology, arts, etc. So these are the people that inhabit your world, whatever, like, something that has a consciousness, basically, that can have opinions and make things. So these are fictional companies. This is like old ruins architecture. These are maybe gods, or this is the farmer in your RPG that gives you a quest. That's all these kind of people. Because everything that is created is made by these people or entities, and they always say something about these people as well. The way a farm looks says something about the farmer. The way a company is structured says something about the people heading that company. So the third thing you have is natural forces, and these are all of the non-sapient elements that are present here. That's pretty much things like weather, tectonic plates, animals, those kind of things. So these are all things that occur without any interference from sapient life. And these usually just say something about the area's conditions and history, like what is the history of this planet? You can read it in the nature that is in it, right? And these things don't have a creator, but always have a designer, at least in our case when we talk about video games. But creators can use natural forces to their benefit, like a dam, for example. You build that with using the river, and obviously that there is a river there will influence whether people settle there or not. So natural forces influence a creator's work. So when you look at building a world, and when you want to make any kind of space, you have a lot of these tools that we've been taught to use that are, architecture, infrastructure, light, science, color, a lot of these things. The interesting thing about that, of course, is that those are created tools. These are not natural tools. So most game environments are built from created assets, and these are usually used in contrast with natural environments to achieve the designer's goals, right? Environmental storytelling, signposting, providing a space for gameplay challenges, boss arenas, atmospheres, etc. So what happens when you're missing that thing that gives you all these tools? What if your game's world is entirely or largely natural? I'm going to take you down a little memory. So me, in the past, this is years ago, we get a design brief. We want to get a new starting area for returning players. We're already in early access at this point. This has to be, or this will be, my fully owned area of Satisfactory. So this is my debut. I got to get this right. I want it to be a desert because they're cool. But also, it suited our design needs, because this is a new starting area. This is something that, nice, big, open space. It gives a lot of building space. It would be very different from what we've been giving before. So I started doing research, and I was faffing about in Google Earth. And then I saw something really interesting, and I call it the pattern. Trust me on this one, all right? I looked at a desert from Google Earth, and I saw these dunes. And then when I zoomed in, these dunes were made out of dunes. And I was like, yeah, of course they are, because if you look at sand, that's what it looks like. It's dunes. It's the same exact shapes. It's the same principle. And then when I realized that, I was like, well, of course, this happens everywhere in nature. You keep seeing these patterns repeating in the macro and in the micro. And even between different substances in nature, you see these same patterns being copied if you zoom in or if you zoom out. The same principle applies to pretty much wherever you look. You can see it everywhere. The moment you get clued in, basically, it starts appearing. Another little story to really illustrate this point. There's this thing called the mycorrhizal network. And this is basically, it's a fungus thing. So when you walk around a forest, it's pretty much pure chaos, right? Especially if there's no paths, it's really hard to navigate. You keep tripping over everything. It's just, you can't really parse, why is this thing there? Why is this thing there? And I always wondered, there's a lone mushroom over here. There's nothing else around it. How did this one thing get here? Why did it choose this spot? And that's why, the mycorrhizal network. So they're like underneath the forest, there's this huge root network that is connected by fungus. And this fungus makes the trees talk to each other. So what it does is it takes resources from the trees, sugars, that the tree has produced because of photosynthesis, and in exchange for those things, it sort of manages the forest. So what you get is that one tree over here is sick and dying. The resources from that tree get funneled like back into the network and towards other trees. So it gets sacrificed because it was going to get lost anyway. And there's another tree over here, like big and strong and old, and it has resources to spare that it can give to smaller, struggling saplings in the shade, like around it. So basically what you have here, a forest, which looks like complete chaos, is actually a nation that has taxes and healthcare and a government and trade, if you really think about it. So the interesting thing about that is like, okay, so nature isn't actually chaos. Nature is a collection of patterns and connections that are followed and broken. And this repeats in the micro and in the macro. And basically, it's full of rules. It's often a matter of scale and relative perspective. And that's exactly what it means. Everything is connected. My man, Guru Patik, was fully correct in saying this and teaching this to our generation. So my core method of natural worldbuilding became that, finding, establishing, and breaking patterns, and using these patterns in addition to or as a placement for creators. So all well and good, I'm giving you this knowledge, but how does that apply? Let's go. Let's go make a desert. So how do you go from a bunch of pictures, assuming you've never been at a desert? If you have been, you probably still have a bunch of pictures and memories in your brain, so you'll have a leg up, but you'll still, assume you're not in the desert making a video game most of the time. So how do you go from this to something like this? It's all, let's establish sort of a relative perspective before we kind of look at this, because this is the way to look at the lenses, basically, to look at this. So the macro is kind of the satellite sort of overview. The medium is more of the airplane overview. So yeah, you got the satellite pictures. You got sort of airplane or helicopter view, and you got kind of micro is like human view. Now, there's some games where you might want to zoom in even more. There's Grounded, for example, that goes like even further into detail. Then you might want to establish another perspective. But for the purposes of most games, these three will do, or at least definitely for the purpose of Satisfactory, these three will do. And we're going to look at an area specifically called Unyanga Kabir. That's in Chad in Africa. So let's go. So when you look at a satellite picture of an area, usually you can already kind of identify a bunch of really interesting things happening. So the first thing that caught my eye with this location and why I actually started zooming in on it was the shape of this lake. It's really weird. I'd never seen anything like this before. But then also I started noticing a bunch of stuff about okay, there's rules about the foliage is growing in certain places and not in others. There's a bunch of stuff happening with the rocks that's interesting. So you can already see okay, there's stuff happening here that I want to look closer into. So we're going to zoom in on those ideas. Let's just look at sand, only sand, and what it is doing here. So if you look at the macro of Africa, of the sand, you can already immediately see a pattern emerge, and it is flow. It is flowing from one part of the continent to another part of a continent in a really steady pattern. Now, I'm not a meteorologist, I'm not a geologist, I don't have a science degree in any of these things, but if you kind of follow this ideologically, most likely what is going on here is patterns of weather and wind that is carrying the sand across a certain shape, pretty much always, or at least in the majority of the time, making this pattern emerge. And if you look at this flow direction, okay, so if I zoom in on an area, it's the same thing. You zoom in, you don't see the curves, but you see it's all going into the same direction. So you have a flow pattern. And maybe that is exactly why this lake looks like that, because the sand is all flowing from one direction and slowly filling up the water. So now we have all right, we've got a pattern of flow. And this pattern of flow, it influences everything. Like, if you look at the rocks, how is the sand flowing through the rocks? Again, if it's all coming from one direction, you can see like there's this sort of higher shelf of rock like over here, and it's a lower over here, meaning that, okay, sand is going down from here. It's almost flowing like water through these rocks and eroding it in a certain way, meaning that like there's these buildups where the flow like builds up against the rock, or is where it is exposed to wind, does not collect as much. You can see the same thing if you zoom in even further, like the human perspective basically. You can see that where the sand gathers is either like out of the wind direction, or it is like where the wind is pushing it against the rock. It is always collecting against other more solid objects. Where it is exposed, there is less of it. That's where the valleys are. And you can kind of see here, kind of, if you zoom back out again, a similar behavior where there's in a lower area, like up top there's a lot of sand. And here, where there's cliffs that are higher, there's a lot less sand because where it is exposed to the wind. So basically, you have a bunch of patterns. You got a flow direction. You have these things encroaching to lakes that look specifically kind of like horizontal stalactites. From the main flow direction, you got buildup against rocks and cliffs in very specific ways. You have shielded and exposed areas with little sand. So when you think about like, all right, wind is present here, and how is it influencing this thing? This is kind of what starts happening. So you start applying it. Like I made this area with one main flow direction in mind. Like this is where the wind is generally coming from. I started building lakes the same way, where like accounting for the flow direction, I had like sand build up. It's you can't really see it here in the picture, but there's rocks kind of protecting the parts of the lake that are still sort of like full of water, that haven't been like encroached as much. And then I had the same, like the build up against the rocks, like kind of depending on where the wind was, where the valleys would be. And then we had the sort of shielded and exposed thing where like, okay, where the rocks are sticking up, like out of the sand, like above most of the landscape, that's not where none of the sand was building up. That was the exposed parts. So yeah, obviously we're not done yet because deserts have dunes, and that's how we all started. So if you look at dunes, they actually have the same thing. They have a direction. All of them are going pretty much the same way. So you have a flow direction, and then if you look at pictures like this, all right, they're snake-like, so they're making those kind of motions. You've got this sort of soft entrance to like this sharp crest, like where they sort of build up, where they're highest, and that then goes back into a soft like build off. You have intersections that can happen, and that also uses sort of that same idea of the crests build off, build up. And then you have the same kind of thing. You've got directional, and this sort of repeats in the macro and the micro. In the texture, it's the same thing. You got snake-like shapes, you got soft curves, you got a top ridge that has a soft start, sharp crest, and a soft end, and you've got intersections. So I did the same thing. I established a directional flow for the dunes. They didn't have to all be a straight line, but they would generally kind of make their way this one direction. I copied the idea of like, okay, it's kind of snake-like, it's got these soft curves, I tried to keep it as soft as possible, and then have these intersections of the ridges where they would kind of fade out and fade back in, and when they were interrupted by a rock for some reason, I would apply the same technique. So basically, that's the method I used, and then you would repeat this with other elements as well. So we're going to kind of speed run this for time. So say with rocks, you look at this picture, you can already see there's some interesting like rock ridge line going on over there, where like this is a higher thing that has been eroded over time. All of the rocks have very particular shapes. They kind of look like teardrops. You have the whole field over there in the corner. It's all kind of, it's got that same sort of directional feel. And when you zoom in from a different perspective, you can see that a lot of these rocks, like they have this sort of taller start and this sort of trail off that like lowers down. So basically what that looks like is like, okay, we've got a ridge line, we've got the teardrop sort of comet-shaped from above, and then it looks kind of like a wave from the side. You've got the rubble that sort of always kind of collects around larger rocks, because that's kind of how erosion works, like large pieces break into smaller pieces, break into smaller pieces, so all of this sort of collects around these larger centers. And then you get stuff like this. And the really interesting thing here also is that this affected how we actually designed this asset set. So the desert rock set is specifically designed so I could make these shapes that I saw like in the desert and that I based this on. So we have a ridgeline over here where kind of everything originates from. We have these like teardrop-shaped islands. It's got that sort of like weird wave height flow with plateaus. And all of the rubble is kind of centered around the larger pieces, and there's a much less of it found in the valleys. And then obviously, no desert is complete without a canyon. With these pictures, you can already see a whole bunch of patterns emerge, because you can see you've got this plateauing, like layering going on where it's kind of stepped. You've got this sort of slope build up, like sort of towards it, like always flanking sort of these rocks because of all of the rubble collecting there. You've got like canyons being formed by erosion, either through wind or through water. So water is, in this case, the main shaper of what this landscape looks like. And then you have, if you look at it from top down, like a lot of these rocks, they are kind of circular. And that's, again, you get a whole bunch of patterns. You got canyon behavior, you get the water's the lowest point in core shaper, you get layers of plateaus, you get these rounded shapes from top down, and you got these slope transitions and cliffs. Now that last one was a bit of an issue for Satisfactory specifically because we're a building game, and flat area is prime real estate for anyone who wants to build a factory. So a lot of slopes and like that kind of natural occurring shape is something that we try to avoid as much as possible, aside from the more exploration-focused areas or when we really wanted to lead the player to a specific location. So we've mostly kind of ignored this rule, and this will become kind of relevant again a little later. So basically, that's what I did. We had the sort of, I painted in the landscape just with a landscape material, like this is where the rivers would be. Later, I put like actual rivers in some places of it and dried riverbeds in other places. It didn't matter whether the river was still present or not. It only mattered that it had been there. And we get the stepped like feeling of the rocks here. Everything looks kind of rounded from up top. And yeah, and as you can see, barely any slopes. There's a few like off of camera here. But yeah, and then you repeat the same thing with the other ingredient, like foliage. You're just like, okay, you look at where is it growing, where is it not growing. Also, in this picture, and specifically, I had to be really careful not to look at these areas here, because that is where actual like humans were living and settlements were. So you be a little careful there, because it cannot. Sometimes it's hard to spot where the humans are and where they're not. And then I established a bunch of patterns, like foliage always grows close to water, pretty logical. Thrives in areas that are shielded from the wind. It thrives along the part of the lake opposite to the wind direction, most likely because the wind picks up the water, brings it a little further inland, and then if it hits a cliff, then it is not actually evaporated like before it reaches the ground or like gets anywhere where things can take root. And then you have thin strips along the water edge that doesn't have terrible growth conditions. And it just tends not to grow in loose moving sand. So same things. I applied like, all right, mostly I concentrated all of the foliage around the lakes. Again, like this is not a hard and fast rule in the sense of there shouldn't be any foliage anywhere else, but this is where the major stuff was happening. And then like, here it's like struggling because there's a lot of loose moving sand, so it's small patches, it's very close to the water, it's thin strips. So, the thing that I really sort of looked at with this is like, okay, you've got all these ingredients, but then if you look at this and try to apply like, okay, what is this doing, what is this doing, what is this doing? It turns out you kind of have to look at like, okay, what is happening in an area to make it the way it is, right? So let's just look at the ingredients that you have for an area. So let's say, yeah, you've got materials, and these are things like sand, rocks, shrubs, sun, water, just all of the stuff that is there, right? And it doesn't have to be in a certain shape, it's just there. These are the elements, and then you kind of have to look at, okay, what kind of structure do we want to put this in? What is the shape of the overall area? What kind of biome are we making here? What are the entrances and exits that the player will be using? What is the theme of this place, if you have a narrative, for example? What is the purpose of this place? Is this a boss arena? Is this a building area? Is this an exploration area? And then you have the distribution of all of these things. Like within a biome, there's always sub-biomes. So within a desert, you have dunes, you have canyons, you have oasis. Like what is an area focused on traversal, like running around, and what is an area that's focused on finding things or doing puzzles? What is an area focused on building? And what is an area focused on combat? So if you combine all these things, funnily enough, this actually turns into a micro, macro, and medium, once again, if you kind of look at the perspective of these things. So you have all these ingredients for a space, and then how do you actually make this into a good meal, basically? And that is the forces, basically. And I kind of identify two types of forces that are present in a natural area. Again, extremely unscientific. So you have dynamic forces and static forces. And dynamic forces are forces that have a spectrum of presence across any moment of time. So the expression of these is unique per area. So these are things like wind, water, wildlife, and sunlight. Sunlight always is changing because the sun is always moving, right? Wind is never constant. It can go from like 0 to 100, basically, like all of these things from moment to moment. And then you have static forces, and they always apply the same across a large area. So these are things like climate. Like this is always a tropical climate, or this is always a moderate climate. This is always the North Sea climate, that kind of stuff. And time. And with time, I mean, what is the history of this area? Did this used to be volcanic? Did this used to be an island that is now flooded? Is this a seabed that's dried up? Like what used to be here? Which will be a huge sort of like way to inform like how you build an area and like how it looks. And then things like gravity, which is mostly relevant to if you're making a sci-fi game on like multiple different planets or something like that. But this is a constant that matters a lot when it comes to distribution of things. So basically, here's some examples of like all of these ideas being sort of applied to like how I made other spaces like in the game world. So we have these dune forest areas that are based on dune forests in real life. This is actually an area I grew up really close to that I never thought was special until I started talking to other people about dune forests, and they were like, "What do you mean dunes and forest in the same place?" So that was a cool little thing. And yeah, the same thing here. Like we have an area called Spiracos that is very much based on the Indonesian archipelago and like all of the patterns that I could kind of derive from that. We have the Rocky Desert, which is very much based on the American deserts. And we have a swamp, which is very much based on the bayou. So there's a lot of like translations of patterns happening. And I'm sure at a glance you can kind of see some of these things already in common. But the thing is that patterns aren't really everything. Because we were very specific in where we actually started breaking these patterns. And I'm going to explain that. Remember when I told you the world of Satisfactory does not have a creator? I kind of lied. So we kind of actually have two. We have the player, but they're in the present. So they're coming in after my work is done. So they don't actually, I don't have to account for their influence in my work because they will come in after. But we also have these advanced alien sapiens that used to be on this planet. Now, why did we choose to have an alien influence in our game? Well, because that means we get to break the rules consistently. And this is going to be very relevant. I'm going to explain this in detail. Because rule breaking is a very, very powerful tool. It is the norm in fantasy and science fiction, very popularly so. We do not have, devices that can break our matter down into pieces and reassemble it somewhere else, but that's a premise of Star Trek. If you have reason for your rule breaking, the cool part about that is that it will create consistency, and then the cool part about that is that it becomes a rule and a new pattern. So, and the cool thing about that also is that it becomes a point of interest. I think Control is a game that does this extremely well, where if you find giant redwood trees in the middle of your office building, it raises some questions, and you're going to be curious about what the heck's going on here. So our reason specifically for doing this is that, one, we have an alien planet. And the only thing we can communicate that this is an alien planet is for it to not feel like Earth. And for it to not feel like Earth, we had to break the rules, right? And also, subverting expectations is honestly kind of fun to do. We needed it for our environmental storytelling. I'll be giving examples about that later as well. And it is a very powerful tool for signposting, as I kind of talked about with Control. So a little bit about what our aliens are, because otherwise you have no context in what we're doing here, is they're higher dimensional incorporeal collective. Now, this mostly just means that they're not physically present on the planet that you are. They can talk to you, they can talk to the AI that you have with you, but they never influence anything physically. That's the most important part about that. And the idea is that the planet you're on is actually a natural computer or server that hosts their life forms in their version of the cloud, essentially. So what that means is that, all right, we had a few ideas of what this planet could look like that would be different. So we had a few things that we added to the landscape that helped with this. So we have a corporeal builder and maintainer, Sam. Just like with servers here, you need someone who actually maintains them in order for them to keep running. So we needed a physical influence that wasn't directly the aliens that could do this thing. And so we created this strange alien material, Sam. And this material can be found at very strategic spots where we sort of expose the idea of okay, this is where we're breaking the pattern, there's something weird going on in the landscape, you find Sam. Because it is the thing that is building this. And then we have influence manifestation tools, just kind of reminders of the presence of the aliens, whether it's incorporeal though they are. And those are the Mercerspheres and Summers loops. So Mercerspheres essentially functioned as Wi-Fi routers, and that is also where you can hear the aliens kind of speak. And you have Summers loops, which are essentially giant batteries that power the environment, but then also power your factory once you've harvested them. But the thing here is, of course, okay, we want to have a planet that feels alien. We want to have this idea of oh, this is a natural machine. But what does a natural machine look like? Because these things seem completely incompatible, right? Because you have artificial and natural in the same sentence. So what does a natural nature look like? Well, it looks like unexpected patterns and solution. It looks a little bit like this. The fun part about this is that it is fully natural what you're seeing. None of this is couldn't happen in real life. The only thing about this versus normal nature is that the patterns of this nature are guided by an outside influence. So that is kind of the idea we went with. So it's maybe a little bit hard to see here, but in our caves, for example, we have these Summers loops, and we want the player to get the Summers loop because they're the big battery, they're the cool thing. You can do a bunch of cool science with it. So we have all of this nature around it. We have stalactites and stalagmites, who normally would be hanging straight down and standing straight up. They're actually pointing towards the object as if gravity is sort of bending it towards them. We have mushrooms clustered around it in a specific, a little bit too even circle for it to feel natural. And we do something similar here. On the outside, we have these root clusters that we build around this thing. This is a shape you wouldn't normally find in nature, so it pulls attention. Something weird's going on here. The same thing, we have these arcs around the planet. And these are essentially we always use these to indicate the presence of where Sam used to be and what the history of this planet was. Because essentially, these are the aliens' pipes and conveyor belts, basically their equivalent. And that's where you can see water coming out of them, like out of some of them still. You can see there's a structure on the inside, and always around them you will find interesting things. You see these, you think, ooh, there's loot. There's something interesting. I can do something with this. And here's the SAM in action, basically. We have the same idea. Like, the SAM is the thing that builds these unnatural things, so naturally we would put the unnatural things around SAM. So now the player is trained, I look for these patterns, and I will find this thing. So, all of that, a whole boatload of information. I have a few hopes. We'll see if it worked out, but we're going to get through it. What does it give you? Like all of this stuff that I just threw at you. Well, hopefully it gives you a tool to do environmental storytelling. Because once you've established a location's history and a location's current conditions, you've already done it. Because you built it just straight into the idea that you have. And signposting, because each pattern is a guide, and each pattern interrupted or broken will call attention. Kind of like hopefully you've seen in the examples I've given you. And naturally, this is a tool for visual weight. People are going to walk where there's a break in their horizon, or they're going to walk like where the cool glowing thing is on the top of the mountain. So navigation and pathing, like all of these natural shapes, like rivers, riverbeds, canyons, animal paths, rock slides, clearings, all of these will inform where a player thinks they can go, where a player will avoid going. And hopefully also gameplay affordances, like does something look climbable, yes or no? If it does and it's not, that's a different issue. But also, for example, maybe a harsh environment indicates harsh gameplay, and lush growth means that, oh, this is where you find things. And in our case, weird structure, this is where you find things. And ideally, also direction for designer asset creation. Like I talked about it with the desert before, that we used the patterns that I found like in the desert to inform how our rock assets would look and how they would combine into specific shapes. So yeah, how can you reinforce the patterns that you found with individual assets? And because the individual assets are your micro, that's where you have that like zoomed in version of the pattern, and then with those you can build the macro from it. It's the same thing with the texture of the sand. You've got the ripples like built into it already, right? It has a certain direction. You can use that. So basically, a lot of the stuff we normally have to use creative assets for. And yeah, another thing is, of course, you can break a pattern for extra effect. This is pretty much my biggest tool to give to you, I think, because natural things behaving unnaturally is a wonderful way to hint that something more is going on, something funky is at play. And this can be done with artificial things as well. This is the fun part about this, because let's just say you're in a spaceship, and suddenly the pipes start looking like roots. Something weird's going on. So you can use this in reverse very effectively as well. So where do you actually find these patterns? Like, as I said, Google Earth is a really good resource for this. But also nature documentaries. They often zoom in and zoom out a lot as well. Study some geology. And I don't mean become an actual scientist, although if you want to, power to you. But I mean, if you kind of learn what are the forces at play in nature, you can start actually recognizing these patterns more. And you can actually start getting the patterns behind the pattern. Like, all right, the sand is doing this thing, the wind is doing this thing. Why is the wind doing this thing? And you'll probably use this to get even further. Go on walks, take pictures, and touch grass. I know as game devs are sometimes very bad at this. But I do really recommend, because nothing will inspire a natural environment more than an actual natural environment. And yeah, something that personally I also found out is that no matter how normal your local area is to you, it is special to everyone else in the world, because they're not locals, right? So use the stuff that you have directly around you. It's super powerful. And honestly, use your friends' holiday pictures. Like, if they went somewhere interesting, tell them to take pictures for you. Tell them to, I don't know, just like texture references that artists love so much. Same thing. Look, give me a landscape. Give me a river. You're going to Iceland. I'm making a volcanic environment. Let's go. And also something that can be really helpful, and that's something that we did as well, is dissect environments from media that made an impact. So one of our art director, for example, like often talked about like how Avatar, the Blue People movie, like used like specific alien elements in a very specific ratio to achieve the "this is an alien planet" effect without having to make everything alien. Because if you make it too alien, it gets uncomfortable. People don't want to spend their time there. That's the whole thing that we also started to figure out. So yeah, if you can, don't just copy the pattern that you see. Try to figure out why it's there. Because like I said before, once you know that a pattern exists, you can kind of start finding the patterns behind it, and then you get into a full rabbit hole that mostly, hopefully, serves you. And yeah, the main thing, remain curious about the world around you. Like, I saw the weird shape of that lake, and I was like, why is it like that? And that is the whole reason our desert exists and looks like that. So, a world feels real when it's mostly consistent and shows its history everywhere. One-to-one realism isn't actually necessary at all. You'll get extremely far with just establishing the key rules of an environment, and then you can make exceptions, establish patterns where necessary and effective, break them consistently. If you break them inconsistently, if you do that a small enough time, then it will kind of blend in, and then you get the sort of establishing the key rules. The key rules will sort of put these lenses on to the player that will make them see an environment in a certain way. Like if you've established it well enough at first, they will forgive a lot of stuff. They won't see the same things that you do. We're always our own worst critics when it comes to this stuff. So yeah, you don't need to be an expert. All you really need to do is observe and investigate. And yeah, just something that's really important here is that every area tells a story, even if it does not involve creators. Something that we've spread across the entire map of Satisfactory is that this thing used to be almost entirely underwater, and we've put coral everywhere, and we've put like all these, the exceptions of the rules of that are always because of the alien influences, and we show that in our world building. So yeah, nature can stand in for creators. And obviously, as we have probably seen in a lot of other media, the opposite is very true as well. And a little bit of hard-earned wisdom that is probably fairly obvious to most people is that gameplay can and should be informed by the world building. Like the two working in tandem is the goal, but sometimes the two will clash. It's going to be inevitable. And often I found gameplay is more important. Again, if you need to break a pattern because it's better for the gameplay, sometimes that's okay, because if you're largely consistent, it will blend in. It will be fine. Gameplay and fun is pretty much always a higher priority than true world-building consistency. The player will forgive one way more than the other one. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not on Twitter, really, but I have an email that you're free to email. I have a partner in crime with me here today that is also going to be in my vicinity, but walking around. If you have more gameplay-related questions to the level design that I've been talking about, thank you for listening. Are there any questions? Oh, got one there.
I would just like to ask, when you started out,
Yeah.
was this stuff that you had an interest in beforehand, or did you have to kind of cultivate and delve into the knowledge of how the world works or how ecology works, you know, geology and stuff like that?
A little bit of both. Like, I did like geology in high school. I was really bad at it. So I was kind of like, oh, I'm bad at it, so I don't like it, right? But then when it started becoming my job, because I joined as a level designer, and I thought I was going to do like puzzles and combat design and like that kind of stuff. And then they were like, all right, here, build a world. I'm like, what do you mean? I don't know how to do this. I don't know. I've never made a natural space like that before. So then I was like, okay, I'm sure nature is cool, so let's go and start actually like investing some time in it. And the one thing that I always thought was that deserts looked really striking. So I was like, all right, let's try to then figure out like, okay, this looks cool, but why does it look cool, right? So it sort of became more of a personal interest, and I started looking at I just started finding some random like graphs about geology about like, oh, this is why it rains on one side of the mountain and not on the other side, stuff like that, like really basic sort of like interesting facts that then make me go like, ooh, all right, why? Like, what's going on here? This is kind of cool, because we live in this world. We have no idea how most of it works, and we don't need to, really. But if you're going to make a space that has to feel believable, I'm like, all right, let's go and do the work. So yeah, it became a personal interest kind of largely through this.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, anyone else? Oh, we got one, yep.
Okay, first of all, sorry for my English, it's very bad, but the question is about making a world that it's natural, and you see all is natural, but it's all influenced by creators, and you have, the question is, if I can make, how can you make a world where nature is strange, that you can see that it's nature, but it's all breaking the rules, and it's all that if you only see the surface of the world, you are seeing the surface and you are playing the game, it's all natural, but in the moment that you fake and that you see something on detail, you know it's strange, that thing should not be here.
Yeah.
But at first look, it all feels natural.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm
Yeah, I think I get where you're asking. So you're asking like, okay, how at a first glance can I communicate that that something's wrong with the nature of the space, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know if we still have access to no, it's fine. Do you know there's this art principle where if you make caricatures of a person's face or just any part, you have to know anatomy first, right? Like if you want to make really good, weird, surrealist stuff you have to know realism first. And it kind of feels the same with nature for me. I'm gonna try to like really quickly like go through this. This is gonna take forever. But the idea is that if you know, for example, how a tree works, if you know all the rules surrounding like this is where this particular tree grows, this is what it needs to do it, this is what you've got all the ingredients and the shape the ingredients needs, pick one, make it different. Like, okay, this tree, like trees, they are supposed to root in the ground. What if this one doesn't? What if it floats? That's one way to do it. It might look like a bug. You got to make it look good. But let's see, there's also trees that like, all right, what if we flip it? The roots are up and the leaves are down. Stuff like that. What if these trees only grow in parts where there isn't water and all the water is left alone? Is there something wrong with the water? Is there something wrong with the trees? So basically it's like, all right, establish like this is the reality, like look at what is real, and then break one of those rules, and then break it consistently. That's basically the same idea. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to get to the thing in time for the question, but it's a long presentation. Many slides, put a lot of effort in it. Also, shout out to our UI UX designer, Natalie, because she helped me make this way fancier than it needed to be. So yeah. If we might have time for another question until I get there, but there's like one picture that I wanted to point at. I'm just going to keep speed running.
So, were you able to use all these patterns for all the rest of the resources, like the metals and oil and such, or did they have to be like guided only by gameplay, by the needs of the gameplay? Or where they had to be?
We had a fair amount of freedom, honestly, with this stuff because, like, we wanted very specific, like, amount of flatness. We have these rules, like, for the area types. So we had like starting areas, we had sort of mid-game areas, and we had end-game areas. And then within that, we had building areas and exploration areas. So depending on what part of the game a player was in, that indicated the amount of challenges we would give them. So a starting area typically had way more flat terrain. That's the one. That's the one. I was gonna for the previous question. Basically, it's the same. Like everything is working as intended, except one rule is broken. It's doing something odd that doesn't belong there. But otherwise, it is fully natural. That's what I wanted to show. But back to the question. So yeah, we had like more flatness in starting areas, less flatness in endgame areas. We had more enemies in endgame areas versus starting areas, more enemies in exploration areas versus building areas, because we had stuff for outposts and stuff. So like we had these restrictions established of like, okay, this type of area has these gameplay needs, and we had some sort of like rough ratios, like this amount, like these amount of assets can be present here versus like this amount of height differences, because we wanted players to work with the terrain, but they also had an option to kind of override the terrain with foundations and other buildables. But that also, like a lot of that isn't naturally instinctual, so the terrain usually still indicates where people would build and where they would feel comfortable building. As most players don't really feel comfortable building in really cramped spaces, they want more open terrain. So once we had those needs kind of established, we could be like, all right, what kind of landscapes fit these needs? So with Dune Desert, for example, it was going to be a starting area, but one for returning players. So the challenge that we decided on there is like, okay, we have a lot of open terrain for all those mega factory builders that love to just build way more than the game requires because they really enjoy it. And then the thing that we're going to make an obstacle is foliage. Because foliage is your early fuel. That is what you use to get your factory running to start with. So if you have a little bit of that, you only have a little. You have to spend a lot of time like managing your energy at the start, which is not as accessible to beginning players because that's a lot of pressure. And those are people that know how to get to automated power really quickly. So they don't actually need as much foliage as the average starting player. So it's OK to challenge them with that. So that's basically the stuff I was playing with there. And then we also had other areas that were like, this one is almost entirely exploration focused with like a few places for outposts. And that's where you could get really creative with what the landscape was like. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Yes, perfect.
Hello.
Hello.
So my question might be a bit wide, but I know that Satisfactory map, you mentioned it going from something else in the beginning to what it is today.
Yeah.
And the different areas have gone through
so many iterations, yes.
iterations and reworks. So
yeah.
I was wondering because today you've been focusing on the desert.
Yes.
But like talking about world building and these patterns you've been mentioning and the alien culture and all, how did every biome like interact and how did you take that into account when iterating through the different biomes? How did everything tie together? If you had to focus on gameplay and resources distribution or you were trying to build on this narrative, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we mostly looked at it sort of area by area basis, like kind of the whole gameplay requirements trumped like everything else. But once those were established, it's like, okay, whether an area was completely empty or we were rebuilding it for any reason, it was like, okay, we have all these tools. We have this tool set for the aliens. We have this tool set for like our library of assets. And usually what we try to do is like, okay, everything we already have, we try to use as much of it as possible, and then introduce some key new elements that would set it apart from all the other areas kind of around it. So it would have these unique identifying features of like, this is this area, this is this area, so that even without a minimap, players could find their way. And then what we had this sort of map overview. And this is mostly like focused on gameplay. Like these are the starting areas. This is how players are mostly going to walk around the world. So the further away from the starting area, the more alien we wanted to build everything, because that's like starting areas are where people are going to spend their most time, and they want to be the most comfortable. Because like humans, like you're never going to build your house where you don't feel comfortable, right? So mostly like we're like, okay, comfort to discomfort is kind of like the spoke wheel that we started going with, and alien is usually discomfort. I hope that worked. All right.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
We are slowly running out of time, so I don't know if we have time for more questions. But I mean, I'll be here like at the event today and also most likely tomorrow for any more talks. Like, you're free to approach me, and my partner in crime, who is not on screen right now, but he's here. Thank you very much. Let's see. Yeah.